very much indeed. We are going to have a few questions, very briefly. First of all, because the restaurant will kick us out if we stay too long. And secondly, because it's very rude to invite a guest and then not feed the guest. So, if anybody would like to just,
Can you just shout?
Yeah, okay. I'm Chris Chan for Voice of America. Senior for 2 questions. How would you suggest to stop the very possible new Chinese embassy at the Royal Mint Court? 1. The second question is, unfortunately today, your party leader, Patten, suggested to expand the years for getting citizenship or residency to 15 years, and this has caused a scare among Hong Kongers. How would you respond to these?
Well, I don't think. I mean, first of all, you mentioned my party. I was chairman of the Conservative Party when there was one. I don't think that anything that Kemi Patten said today, she's known by The Guardian as Kemi Kazi, which is maybe unfair. I don't think that anything she said today will have any effect on the existing terms of the BNO passport scheme. And I've been speaking in Parliament with David Alton and 1 or 2 others about trying to ensure that the children of people who are here under the passport scheme are regarded as home students when it comes to going to university, which I think would be only fair and would ensure that more Hong Kong students could come to our universities. And the first question you asked was about
the Chinese embassy.
Chinese embassy. Look, the British planning system is in many respects absurd. I wouldn't seek to intervene with it. What I would like to know is whether the government have intervened on the side of Chinese, but above all, that if they give permission for it, if the local authority and others do, I hope they'll make it clear that this is not meant to help the Chinese embassy to keep an eye on Chinese residents in this country. What happened in Manchester a couple of years back was outrageous, and it was pretty pathetic that the British government didn't do more about it. I think we do have to recognise that a lot of people are living with a degree of fear which they shouldn't have to deal with. One of the people I spoke to last night at this launch of the Mark Clifford book had herself just had a bounty placed on her head. How can you, if you're a civilized state, put bounties on the heads of people who freely have gone to live somewhere else? So I think if we give permission for this vast embassy to be built, we'll try to make sure that it's treated like any other embassy, and doesn't, for example, through the Chinese Students and Scholars Association, try to keep tags on students who are here, because that's a real problem.
Thank you.
Lord Patten, I was lucky enough to read a few of your books, and I know that you have a much broader range of knowledge and interest than Hong Kong and China itself. But I wonder whether I could ask you, how worried are you that the new Trump government will make China look good by comparison?
I've got 8 grandchildren, 4 boys, and I went to speak at the school of one of them the other day. I spoke to about 500 or 600 boys, and one of the boys at the end said to me, "Do you think, Lord Patten, you could say anything cheerful?" And then he went on to say, if he'd just seen a film about Trump called The Apprentice, and he said, "Do you think that should convince us of the benefits of democracy?" He said, if we were, in the unlikely event, if we were in a room this evening with President Xi Jinping, how would we best explain that our system is better than his? And unfortunately, when democracies, when open societies behave badly, it does undermine the case for arguing for them. One of my favorite politicians was a candidate for the American presidency. He unfortunately lost twice, I think, to President Eisenhower. He was called Adlai Stevenson. And he said, you shouldn't only in a democracy want to fight for your values, but you should be prepared to live up to them as well. And I think one of the worrying things at the moment about the Trump administration is that it doesn't seem to share the sort of values which I share and which many of you share. In all sorts of ways. There was something I think particularly grisly about seeing the richest man in the world, who's now being given responsibility for the US government, closing down the American aid program which helps the poorest. I mean, it seems to me an astonishing thing to do. Not all of you will have read Thucydides. I had to at school. And there's a wonderful description in Thucydides in this great history of the Peloponnesian War in the 4th century BC. Wonderful description of the war between Athens and a little island called Milos. The Athenians wanted the Melians to join them against Sparta. The Emelians didn't want to. So the Athenians wiped out the island. They killed all the men and sold the women into slavery. And their message to the Melians when they did this, unfortunately, sounds a bit like President Trump. They said, you don't understand, the strong do what they can, and the weak suffer what they must. An awful way of describing what the world is like for some people. And I can't help feeling that's quite close to Mr. Trump. Though he may say something completely different tomorrow. He does tend to change his mind day to day. But the present policy on the Middle East is plainly against international law and plainly amounts to ethnic cleansing. And those are not things you expect for somebody who purports to be the leader of the free world.
I'm going to take just one more question. I just want to ask you. You mentioned that the government is planning a so-called reset to examine the way Britain should conduct its relations with the PRC. In your opinion, what would be top of that agenda?
Well, last year when there was a lot of discussion about this, arguing that we should have an audit of our relationship with China and then have a published strategy for dealing with China, that was on hold under the last government, and it seems to be also mysteriously not on the table yet under this one. I think there'd be two things that I would insist on. First is evidence-based policies. So if you say, we've got to get on with China as well as possible, I mean, the sort of Mandelson's view, we've got to do that. Well, in Mandelson's case, his company did have a lot of clients, which I need. We've got to get on with them, otherwise we won't be able to trade with them, and we won't be able to get them to sign up to international agreements. Well, Chinese don't do business with us just because we cower, which we very often do. They do business with us if they want to buy things that we make at a reasonable price. If you think back to Australia, when the Australians challenged the Chinese about the outbreak in Wuhan of coronavirus, and Wang Yi, who was foreign minister then and is again now, as you know, and coming to this country this week, Wang Yi said, well, what had happened in Wuhan was entirely manageable and not transmissible. And while he was saying that, the Chinese Communist Party was buying hand over fist PPE equipment from Australia. So the Australians, understandably, made fuss and said there should be a WHO inquiry. At which point the Chinese government said they weren't going to buy anything else from Australia. Huge fuss about it. 2 years later, Australian exports to China were higher than they'd ever been. Why? Because the Chinese government needed lithium, they needed barley for making delicious beer, and they needed iron ore at the price. So they bought it. We talk about the importance of having a, quote, good relationship with them because of investment in this country. A Chinese investment in this country is, I think, 0.2% of total foreign direct investments. If you look at the profits made by the City of London, 0.4% come from any businesses associated with China. So the evidence is, and if you think about it, the evidence when I was having lots of arguments with China, that British exports during that period went up faster than they'd been in the previous period and went up faster than those of any other OECD countries. So first of all, do business on the basis of evidence, not on being frightened into accepting that the Chinese Communist Party has a sort of perpetual mandate of heaven. And the other point I've touched on, you say quite properly that we want to engage China in order to have agreements on epidemic disease, dealing with it, because we want to have agreements on the environment. But we should just remember that they may sign agreements, but they break them. What happened in Hong Kong with the joint declaration, which at the Chinese suggestion was tabled as a treaty at the UN. So the first thing I think that we should do is have a policy which is based on evidence rather than mush. The mush school of diplomacy. And the other thing I think is very important is that we shouldn't demean ourselves. We should stand up for our own values. The Adley-Stevenson point. Nobody else is going to. And if we don't stand up for our values, then sooner or later they'll be trashed. So those are the two things I would insist on best. And if you want to know where a very good strategy for dealing with China was set out, I wrote an article in the New Statesman last year which disappeared into thin air, but actually set out what I thought a strategy on China should be. I'll send a copy to Steve and one or two other people if they want it. And unfortunately, the New Statesman managed to more or less lose it, but it set out what I thought we should do with China. I'm not in favour of being antagonistic. Certainly, I don't argue with the Chinese people. My argument is with the Chinese Communist Party, and I refuse to accept that in order to perform as a normal, open society, we should always do so on our knees. It doesn't seem to me that it's either sensible or necessary in order to work with China when it's possible. Talking about this government's policy on China, Keir Starmer said it would be one of engagement, of cooperation, and of challenge. Well, you can't be against engagement when it's possible. You can't be against cooperation when it's possible. But you don't see much of the challenge. And the fact that I feel very strongly that when the Chinese break their word, when they behave badly, we should say so openly, because they don't like it and it might get them to behave better. So there's a few thoughts, but anyway, New Statesman, look it up from Wikipedia or whatever, from last year. Thanks very much.